Is restaurants okay to visit? Do I need a mask when I go out? There's so much uncertainty out there, and people are looking to experts for answers and reassurance. Okay, and from a business perspective, we're in kind of the same boat. Businesses have just as many questions as individuals do. How do I bring back my workers safely? How do I make my customers feel more comfortable about coming back into my retail space or my restaurant? How do I reduce the chances of an outbreak in my facility? And how do I keep up with all the industry changes and all the new information and developments around this subject? And I think, like individuals, businesses are looking towards experts for guidance. And so I think as HVAC and building management experts, we're uniquely qualified to be the group that guides those building managers and owners on this subject. So the healthy buildings discussion was certainly triggered by the COVID pandemic, but it's certainly not all about the COVID pandemic. And we certainly don't think these are concerns that will disappear after this is all done. This is a new core discussion point around commercial buildings in the same way that the OPEC energy crisis caused building designers to tightly seal their facilities to conserve energy. So it's kind of ironic that the two subjects are related now as we work hard to improve the indoor air quality in these tightly sealed buildings. So from recent situations, we find ourselves asking two primary questions. First, is our environment clean and safe, and is it ready for businesses to continue? And by environment, we mean the indoor air quality. So again, this discussion was brought into focus by COVID, but this statement is much broader than just COVID. It addresses all kinds of pathogens. We're talking about viruses, bacteria, fungus, mold, as well as allergens such as pollen, dust, and dander. And when we talk about air quality, we also discuss O2 levels, where we need to ensure healthy levels to keep us healthy, comfortable, and alert. And second, is the building adhering to the current health and safety guidelines that may be recommended or required by the cities, provinces, or federal, or third-party organizations such as ASHRAE or the CDC or Health Canada. So with over 150 years of history in the HVAC business and thousands of patents inside of Honeywell, we have a lot of experts that we turn to for situations like this. But we don't rely solely on our knowledge here. We work closely with leading third-party industry groups and follow their guidance on industry standards. And here in North America, one of those leading groups, of course, is ASHRAE. So we've been working very closely with ASHRAE and the epidemic task force that they've created to address the concerns of COVID specifically. So ASHRAE will be the first to tell you that they generally take a very conservative approach to all discussion points, including this one. And even with that in mind, they do believe that changes to building operations, including the operation of HVAC systems, can reduce airborne exposures to pathogens, which of course means that what we do on a day-to-day basis really does make a difference. So they've also made a very specific statement regarding SARS, which is similar to the COVID virus, and that is the ventilation and filtration provided by HVAC systems can reduce the airborne transmission of viruses. So ASHRAE positioned themselves in this way, that the healthcare mindset is suddenly applicable to all facilities. And most of those facilities are not designed to implement it. And so traditionally, we've all thought compartmentally about hospitals, for example. Now, we have to take that kind of prevention and containment and even potential isolation type of mindset, and then we apply it to the schools and office buildings and retail spaces. So how do we do that effectively? I mean, building off of the existing infrastructure in the building and educating stakeholders along the way so that everyone is comfortable moving towards that goal together. So ASHRAE has focused on about half a dozen areas that can make a difference. They are focused on more outside air, which again goes against some of the energy ideas that we've had traditionally. But obviously, the more outside air you bring into the building, the more you'll dilute all the negative components that may not be wanted. Related to that bit is airflow control. We do this using pressurization by controlling certain rooms to have both positive and negative pressure. Positive pressure to keep air out of a space and negative pressure to pull air away from a space. And then we implement that in a way to keep contagions in and out of a building. course, ASHRAE recommends enhanced filtration and sterilization and to manage the recirculation of air in a building. If you don't want to build up certain particles inside of a building, you obviously don't want to keep recirculating that air, that same air within the building. So you're going to want to be exchanging with outside air as much as possible. And then there's temperature and humidity, which combined make relative humidity, which really make a big difference with pathogens in particular. So with commercial buildings, when it comes to compliance and risk management, what is the ultimate goal we're moving towards? Essentially, there are 4 key areas here. The first is that we're looking to restore confidence with the building manager and with any of the occupants of the building. They might be employees or guests, they might be retail shoppers, but we want people to feel comfortable coming back into our buildings again. Obviously, being able to meet safety standards is a big deal to everybody in our industry. And at the moment, these are changing, and we need to be able to stay on top of this information and address any new standards that come out with regards to indoor air quality and social distancing. Those are the ones that are front row center right now. Obviously, at the top of everyone's mind, and in particular, the building owners, everyone wants to minimize the risk of an outbreak or a second wave or a third wave. And so putting in place things such as thermal screening, people tracking, control flow of people through a building, those are all important aspects of a building. And then that really leads to the owners reducing the risk and liability of the company, and by making sure that they're putting the right steps in place to make indoor air quality an improvement. So a quick overview of some of the solutions that we have been focused on over the last couple of months, putting into place to help everyone within our buildings community. On the left-hand side, you'll see our air quality focus. Again, we'll look into each of these in detail, but they all go back to those key details of ventilation, temperature and humidity, filtration and sterilization, and pressurization. Those are really the keys to affecting the indoor air quality. And we'll also talk a little bit about safety and security and monitoring. So this is using cameras, for example, for thermal imaging, people spacing, people flow, temperature checking, and that kind of thing. This is becoming a more important part of an overall healthy, secure building. So we'll go over each of these items and what Honeywell can do to help. The green indicates areas that we've got available today, and we're going to hint about some things that are yet to come in the near future. So talking about indoor air quality, a lot of it is what we get into every day. So a lot of it won't be new to you. And in general, we'll talk about building management systems where we're already using temperature and humidity inputs already. And sometimes we're using occupancy sensors. We're controlling a wide variety of spaces. And traditionally, we've talked about comfort in a space, but it really ends up that indoor air quality is a byproduct of this as well. So sensing what's in the space, tracking it through dashboards, and maybe controlling and filtering the air at any given time, that's kind of what we want to talk about, and how we've taken some of these things for granted and how we do certain things for comfort, how that actually affects the indoor air quality. So air quality matters, right? The goal is to give your customers confidence to come back into the building. And with a recent survey that showed results of more than half of workers still being afraid of getting sick from coming back into a building. So part of it is truly improving the space, improving the air quality within the building. And then there's another aspect where we have to show information to show that it's improved, showing the status of the quality of that air within a building. So if you look at this, it shows us some of the things that we've already done in the past. For example, air exchanges. We've talked about ASHRAE standards over the years, going up or down, but ultimately we know that it helps to dispel certain odors and chemicals and ultimately reduces the transmission of infectious agents. Temperature and humidity is something, again, that we've all taken for granted, but it truly does have an impact. One, productivity of people within the space, but also humidity specifically has the ability to reduce infectious particles within a space. and it affects us how long a virus stays in the air and ultimately reduce virus transmission. And so maintaining this comfort zone of humidity between 40 and 60% also has an impact of the overall air quality of a space. Filtration is important. Generally, all buildings have filtration. It's just a question of how much is done. The recommendation of MERV 13 filters or higher is important. And with our electronic air cleaners, we can increase the efficiency to MERV 14 levels, thereby reducing the circulation of unwelcome particles. UV lights can also have an impact on what's living in the air. Generally, UV lights sterilize surfaces, and we'll talk in a bit more detail as to the best use of these lights. Then, of course, pressurization. Pressurization is used heavily in buildings and critical environments such as hospitals and laboratories. But knowing now what we know about commercial buildings, we find that there are uses for pressurization to help us keep things that we don't want from spreading in the air. So these are all things from the controls and the filtration and the sensing that we can use to help the overall indoor air quality of a building. So with ventilation, obviously getting 100% outside air would be ideal. But we know that comes with a cost of energy, but we can increase the amount of outside air we bring into a building using such things as our economizers, to reduce the recirculation of unwanted particles and pathogens inside the building. It's a balance. Not all equipment made is designed to bring in 100% air or outside air, but where it's possible, we try to increase this ratio with an accepted energy cost. Productivity is impacted by indoor air quality. When a person's comfortable and we don't have to worry about the temperature level or aren't affected by high CO2 levels, then this leads to better performance and decision making. You'll see throughout the presentation, we mentioned certain Honeywell products, and here we see our Jade economizers, which allow us to use the free cooling by bringing in colder outside air to allow for economical cooling of the building. A lot of those algorithms are used by many of our unitary controllers, so you should take advantage of that and apply it where it makes sense. Talking a little bit more about temperature and humidity, there's a great video on YouTube to which I've included the link here that talks about the reduction of airborne pathogens when you keep the relative humidity of the room between 40 and 60%. The ability of those pathogens to live is at the lowest within this humidity range. So it's a great way for you to have an impact on a customer's building. We've already got the controls and ways for us to affect the humidity, so it's a great way for us to control this parameter. This slide shows the relative sizes of droplets and how some of them can stay airborne for hours or even days in the worst case scenario. And so as droplets dry out, they tend to have the ability to stay airborne a bit longer. By keeping the humidity in a sweet spot, we're able to ensure that these droplets have a minimum time to be airborne. Today, Honeywell's got temperature and humidity sensors to interface with the controllers and the economizers. And we also have CO2 sensors as well. CO2 is a great indication of how many people are within a space, and so it gives us a picture of room occupancy. This allows us to increase ventilation when you get higher occupancy levels within a section of the building. To give you a little hint of what's coming, particulate matter sensors are already out there, and now we have the ability to sense various sizes. There's been a lot of discussion about the actual about the actual size of the COVID virus, which generally is believed to be about 0.1 microns. Now, this is typically riding on or clumped with larger particle sizes. You don't typically get viruses just floating out there by themselves. So the concentration of particulate matter in a room helps give an indication of possible sources of pathogen and also gives us an indication of filtration efficiency. Other sensors that will soon be available also include VOC sensors, or volatile organic carbon. The measure of volatile organic compounds is also a good indication of air quality. As again, there are guidelines with respect to safe levels of VOCs, which can be found in the air. The last one on the right is the all-in-one sensor. Sometimes there's a desire or need to have less on the walls. So by combining the measurement of temperature, humidity, CO2, particulate, and VOC level, so we can get all the sensing power with a minimalist approach. Talking a bit about pressurization. We talked earlier about the importance of controlling the pressure within critical environments. So as for buildings, if we control the positive pressure and negative pressure areas of a building, we can control the flow of pathogens between certain critical areas. The Honeywell Venturi valves have been around for some time now. The Phoenix model works well in critical environments such as hospitals and labs, as they allow for the precise and accurate control at low flows. They're repeatable and reliable, and there's no need for their calibration. So they have very minimum maintenance requirements. We do plan on having a more commercial version of this Venturi valve that isn't focused on critical environments, so stay tuned for that. So with respect to filtration and sterilization, we can look at the particulate matter sizes of 10 microns and 2.5 microns. And from this illustration, you can get a sense of the relative sizes of these particles. So when we really look at filtration, our goal is to see what we can really pull out of the air. So we talked earlier about MERV 13 filters, and that these filters capture at least 50% of 0.3 micron filters, 0.3 micron particles in the air. A MERV 14 filter, which is what our Honeywell electronic filters are capable or rated at, captures more than 75% of these 0.3 micron particles. And again, it accomplishes this with very little pressure drop. Other areas we're getting into are sterilization, when we use UVC lights for surface sterilization, which can be duct mounted for cooling coil disinfection in typically dark and damp spaces. And these are naturally prime candidates for UV disinfection. UVC typically inactivates pathogens by disrupting their DNA and their ability to replicate. So hospitals have embraced UV in recent years because of its ability to deactivate these pathogens. And a lot of these have actually become resistant to antibiotics, and these are the ones that we called superbugs. Don't change that yet, because I added this. When UVC is used to deactivate pathogens, we have to take two factors into consideration: the time at which the surface being disinfected is irradiated versus the intensity of the UVC that is irradiating the potentially contaminated surface. Combined, these two factors will give us what is known as the kill rate, or the effectiveness of pathogen deactivation. Some pathogens are certainly more resistant than others, and depending on the organism we are targeting, we have to ensure that we are delivering the proper combination of time and intensity of the UVC. So when you combine electronic air filters with the UV sterilization, that becomes the ultimate combination where you're removing particulate matter down to 0.3 microns and then inactivating any pathogens that may be on that surface. So Healthy Buildings has broadened the conversation we're having with customers related to the concerns of the building owners, the facility managers, and end users. So I did want to just take a few minutes to talk about the safety and security products that Honeywell has that we can bring alongside to complement all the building management products that we have. So as I'm not an expert on the safety and security side of things, we'll look at this at a high level, and then we can certainly put you in touch with some experts to discuss some of the products in greater detail.
Can you grab me a water, please?
One of the best topics of conversations these days is thermal screening. Now, I'm sure many of you have already experienced this in some places you've gone recently. Temperature screening methods I've experienced have all been manual, where someone takes your temperature using an infrared thermometer just to make sure you aren't running a fever. But the big question is, how do we go from making this a manual measurement to an automated one, and ideally a touchless one? The answer is through cameras. By utilizing security cameras or thermal imagers, we can monitor the body temperatures of occupants to ensure that the monitoring process is not only precise but consistent. Then you can also use that data from these cameras and put them into dashboards that is usable and relevant to the security of the building. So once you know what's going on within your facility, you can control access of people who have symptoms of high temperatures. This type of system allows you to control that and thereby reducing the chances of having a breakout at your facility. Of course, this type of system allows you to improve detection, and this type of system you can receive alerts. So if somebody is in the building and for some reason they escape detection, then you can receive alerts if their body temperature is out of range. Another conversation we're hearing a lot about right now is people counting. And there's a couple of areas where this comes into play for business owners and business people in general. One is reducing frontline staff exposures. So if you can reduce the amount of contact between your employees and guests or other people coming into contact with the people within your facility, that's a good thing. So we can do that again with cameras, monitoring where people are and where they're supposed to be. And then there's obviously just straight people counting. Where are the people? Where do you want them to be? And what do you want, or do you want them to move around at all? Of course, this also helps with compliance. A lot of government regulations or recommendations about businesses and what % capacity they should be operating at now be automated. Of course, you've also probably experienced this when you're out and about, where people counting is done manually right now. And so by automating, you've increased the level of monitoring and accuracy of that monitoring. And then of course, this increases productivity because you don't have to have people dedicated to counting bodies. And by taking this automated data, you can use this information to make better informed business decisions. So related to people counting is people flow. It's not only important to know how many people you have in your facility and where they are, but it's important to know where they're moving back and forth. So again, you can take this information from those cameras, analyze it, put it into dashboards, and make sure that everything is working the way you want it, and make sure that you're compliant in general, and that you're utilizing your spaces to the best advantage that you can. You can also automate and control access privileges based on what you see in these cameras and based on where you see people in your building and where you don't want them. So another aspect of monitoring the movement of people within your facility is to ensure that they're following social distancing guidelines. From these cameras, we can see that we are able to measure distances between people, and from that information, determine whether social distancing guidelines are being followed. Again, this allows you to automate this measurement, provide you with alerts and guidelines, and help you to stay within the compliance of regulations of any government bodies. Now, the trend towards touchless access control is certainly going to be evident in post-pandemic times. The less surfaces that you touch, the less possibility of transmitting disease. Cameras are now able to provide facial recognition access, so we don't have to touch keypads or fingerprint readers. Just another way to reduce physical contact of possible sources of infection. So to summarize, there are various tools available to us all within the building management community to help us transform our customers' buildings into healthy environments. We can monitor and control various parameters such as temperature, humidity, carbon dioxide, and VOCs to affect indoor air quality, but this reduces the chances of airborne pathogen transmission. And shortly, now we have filtration and sterilization methods to complement the measurement of this indoor air quality. And lastly, we have other tools available to us through safety and security to help monitor the number of people that in their respective locations, and whether they set off any concerns caused by elevated body temperatures or by not adhering to social distancing guidelines. So in summary, I hope that from this presentation, you've taken away a few important ideas. First, we can improve the indoor air quality of buildings by modifying some of the parameters of the current equipment being used. We can affect temperature, humidity, and air exchanges. Second, we can add methods which are currently at our disposal to increase the effectiveness of building hygiene. And lastly, there are tools such as thermal imaging and software for people counting and flow. So that can all help us determine whether we're compliant with government regulations. I guess we'll take a look at any questions that may have come up during the presentation.
I'd like to thank Dennis for doing that. I know we covered a lot of topics in a small amount of time. So a lot of them are great topics. Obviously, we're under a time crunch, so we can't get too in depth into a lot of the topics, but Dennis and I are both available, after the presentation via phone, email, if anybody is interested and wants to kind of hear a little bit more. I think this presentation kind of covers a lot of what's going on currently with the pandemic in the world. I think Honeywell's done a good job of at least outlining some of the issues. Obviously, there's areas for improvement, I would say, here and there, but for the most part, I think it's a good presentation. I'd like to thank both for giving Honeywell and WestExcel and myself the opportunity to at least get this out there. And I think I'm looking at the questions and answers here, and I was just going to kind of start at the top and just kind of open the discussion.
Flip it over to me.
Okay, 1 second. Hey, Mark.
Yeah. Okay. So, I got the helm again.